My daughter is 16 years old, and she almost never comes downstairs before 8 in the morning. So when I heard her footsteps on the stairs at 7, I knew something was wrong. I was in the kitchen making coffee, still in my robe, still half asleep, thinking about nothing in particular. A grocery list, maybe. Whether I'd remembered to move the laundry. Just a Tuesday morning in November. The kind of morning where everything is ordinary and small and contained, and you move through it without expecting anything to happen, because usually nothing does. She came into the kitchen without saying good morning. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to the kitchen table, set her laptop down, turned it to face me, and stepped back. Then she crossed her arms and waited. I looked at the screen. It was the 23andMe website. Her account. We had done the test 3 weeks earlier for her biology class, an ancestry and genetics project, something about tracing inherited traits and geographic heritage, completely routine. I had signed the consent form without thinking twice, found a padded envelope, addressed it, mailed it the same afternoon. Forgot about it almost entirely within 48 hours, the way you forget about ordinary things. On the screen was her inbox. There was one new message, from a profile named Ruth Ann H. 52, sent at 11:47 the previous night. I leaned in and read it. It said, "Hello, I'm not sure how to start this, so I'll just say it directly. My name is Ruth Ann Holloway. I'm 52 years old, and I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. According to the DNA comparison, we share enough genetic material that your mother and my birth mother are very likely the same person. I was given up for adoption in October of 1974. I have been searching for 11 years. I want you to know that I don't want to cause any pain or disruption to anyone's life. I understand completely if you'd prefer not to respond, and I will not contact you again if that's your choice. But I have been looking for a long time, and I needed to try. If you are open to talking, I would be so grateful." I read it once, then I read it again. Then I straightened up and looked at my daughter. She said, "Mom." I said, "I see it." She said, "Is that possible?" And I didn't answer, because I genuinely, truly did not know. My mother had never mentioned a pregnancy, not once in my entire life, not in a single conversation across 53 years. Not when I was a child asking questions about family history, not when I was pregnant with my own daughter and we talked about what my childhood had been like, and she told me all kinds of things she had never told me before, the way people do when they're about to become grandparents. Not ever. She was a private woman in some ways. She kept certain rooms of herself locked, and she didn't apologize for it. But this was not the kind of thing you kept locked. This was not a small thing to hold. My mother was 74 years old. She lived 40 minutes away in the house she had shared with my father before he passed, 8 years ago now. I talked to her every Sunday. I had lunch with her on the second Saturday of every month without fail. I drove her to her doctor's appointments and helped her manage her finances and spent every major holiday at her table. I knew her, or I believed I knew her, in the way you believe things you have never had reason to question. I said to my daughter, "Go get ready for school. I'll handle this." She didn't move immediately. She stood there looking at me with that expression teenagers have when they're trying to decide if the adult in front of them is actually okay or just performing okay. Then she nodded and went upstairs, and I listened to her footsteps on the stairs, and then the sound of her moving around up there, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning, and I sat down at the kitchen table. I poured my coffee. I sat. I read the message a third time. October 1974. My mother was born in 1952. That would have made her 21 years old. 21, and alone. What I knew was this. My mother and my father didn't meet until 1975. They married in 1977, which meant that in October of 1974, she was not yet with my father. She was on her own. Wherever she was, whatever her life looked like then, she was alone. I had never thought very much about who my mother was before she was my mother. Children rarely do. She existed, in my understanding, as a woman who had always been there, who had always been the person at the center of our household, who had always had the particular shape and gravity that she had. The idea of her being young and alone and frightened, the idea of her at 21 facing something enormous by herself, was not a picture I had ever tried to form. I sat there for a long time and tried to form it. Then I picked up my phone and I called her. She answered on the second ring the way she always does, cheerful and a little brisk, the way she is in the mornings. She said, "Good morning, sweetheart. You're up early." I said, "Mom, I need to ask you something." Something shifted in her voice, very small, almost nothing. She said, "Of course, what is it?" And I said, "Does the name Ruth Ann Holloway mean anything to you?" The line went quiet. Not the quiet of someone thinking. Not the comfortable quiet of someone looking something up in their memory. This was the quiet of someone stopping. The quiet of someone who has been living alongside a specific fear for a very long time and has just heard the exact sound she was afraid of hearing. The quiet of a door she thought was sealed, coming open. I counted. 11 seconds. Then she said, "Where did you hear that name?" Her voice was completely controlled, steady. I had heard that voice before, when my father was diagnosed, when she got her own health scare 2 years ago, in every moment of her life where she decided that whatever was happening, she was going to face it standing up. I recognized it now. She was standing up. I told her everything, the DNA kit, the biology project, the message that came in at 11:47 the previous night. I read it to her word by word. When I finished, the quiet on her end was different this time, fuller, like something had just expanded inside of it. Then she said, "I was 19. I didn't have a choice. Not 21, 19. I had been wrong. She was 19 years old, alone, in 1974. I said, "Mom, are you okay?" She said, "I don't know yet. Give me a minute." We talked for 45 minutes. She told me things she had never said out loud before, and I could hear in her voice what it cost her to say them. Not regret exactly, not shame, but the strange, exhausted relief of a weight you have carried so long you have forgotten it was weight until someone asks you to set it down. She told me about 1974, about a year she had lived through in a city 3 hours from where she grew up, working a secretarial job, sending money home to help her mother with her younger siblings. About a man whose name she was not ready to say and might never be ready to say. And a situation that came apart in the way such situations came apart in 1974. Quietly, with no good options, with no one who was going to help you navigate it, and no language yet for asking. She told me about a clinic, about a social worker named Helen who was very kind and gave her tea and told her she was doing a brave thing and that the baby would go to a good family. She told me about signing papers in a room with fluorescent lighting. She told me about driving home alone afterward in the car she had borrowed from a friend who did not know where she was going. She said, "I named her June." No one knew. Not my mother, not my sisters, no one. I said, "June." She said, "I thought about her every October 18th, every year. Every single year for 53 years I thought about her on that day. And I wondered if she was all right, if she had ended up somewhere good." She said, "I told myself she would have a better life than I could have given her. A 19-year-old with a borrowed car and a secretarial job and a family that needed her money. I believed that. I needed to believe that." I said, "Do you want to know about her?" The pause was shorter this time. She said, "Yes. Tell me everything." I told her what little I knew. 52 years old, Knoxville, Tennessee. Searching for 11 years. Careful, measured, apologetic in her message. The kind of person who knocks gently because she is afraid of disturbing things. The kind of person who says, "I will not contact you again if that's your choice," and means it. When I got off the phone, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I had a sister. I had had a sister for my entire life, and I had never known. She was 52 years old, and she lived in Tennessee, and she had been looking for 11 years. 11 years of searching closed records and submitting to DNA databases and waiting and hoping and preparing herself to never find anything and submitting again anyway. And then my 16-year-old daughter did a school project on a Tuesday and mailed a kit in a padded envelope. And everything that had been sealed for 53 years came open overnight. I went back to the laptop. I read Ruth Ann Holloway's message one more time. I thought about what it must have cost her to write it, the care of it, the consideration, every sentence constructed to give me an exit if I needed one. I don't want to cause any pain. I understand if you don't want to respond. The apology built into every line. A woman who had spent 11 years looking and had found us and was apologizing for it. I typed back. I said, "My name is Carol. I'm the daughter she raised. I didn't know about you until this morning. I have just gotten off the phone with our mother. I want you to know that she has thought about you every single year on October 18th, your whole life. She named you June. She has never told anyone until today. I think you should know that. I would very much like to talk if you're willing." I hit send. I sat there staring at the screen. 4 minutes later, the response came in. It said, "Carol, I have been sitting here since I sent that message last night, not sleeping, not eating, just waiting and trying to decide if I'd made a terrible mistake. I don't know what to say except thank you. Thank you for not disappearing. Thank you for calling her. She named me June. She thought of me every October. I have to go sit down for a minute. I will write back as soon as I can." I laughed and cried at the same time. I don't think I have ever done that before. Or maybe I have and I just never noticed what it felt like. That specific sensation of something breaking and opening simultaneously, like a window that has been stuck shut finally giving way. We spoke on the phone 2 days later, Ruth Ann and I. 2 hours and 40 minutes. I watched the call timer on my screen. She had a voice that reminded me of my mother. Not exactly. There was a Tennessee accent my mother had never had, a slightly lower register, a particular cadence that was her own. But something in the rhythm of it, the pauses, the way she said certain things, with a care and a precision that felt familiar in a way I couldn't quite name. She told me about her life, about her adoptive parents who had told her from the beginning that she was chosen, who had been good and honest with her, and who she had loved completely. About growing up in Ohio and moving to Knoxville in her 20s for a job, and staying because she met a man there and they built a life, and now they had been married for 23 years and had 2 teenage boys who knew about the search, and who had called her the morning after she sent the message to ask, "Mom, did you hear back?" She said, "I never stopped. Even when I had gone months without doing anything, I never actually stopped. Every time a new database opened up, I would sign up. Every time a law changed somewhere and records became more accessible, I would apply. I just kept thinking, she is somewhere. There are people who know her. If I can just get close enough to the edges of that world, something will happen. I said, my daughter used a mail-in kit for a biology project. She laughed. It was my mother's laugh. I heard it, and I had to put my hand over my mouth. She said, I know. I have thought about that at least 100 times in the last 48 hours. The specific randomness of it. A 16-year-old girl and a school project. I said, are you ready to talk to her? To our mother? The pause on her end was long and full of something I couldn't name. Something that had been waiting a very long time to be felt. She said, I've been ready for 11 years. I just didn't know if there was going to be a door. I called my mother that night. I told her I had talked to Ruth Ann. I told her about the husband, the 2 boys, the 23 years in Knoxville. I told her about the voice. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, does she seem all right? Did she have a good life? I said, she had parents who told her she was chosen, and she believed them, and she built something good, and she spent 11 years looking for you anyway, not because anything was missing, just because she needed to know where she came from. My mother made a sound I couldn't fully interpret, somewhere between grief and gratitude. The sound of something that has been held for 53 years, finally being allowed to breathe. They spoke on a Thursday evening. I didn't listen. I gave them that. Whatever that first conversation was, it belonged to them. My mother called me afterward, and she sounded different, like something wound very tight had been allowed to loosen by a single degree. She said it went well. She said they talked for a long time. She said Ruth Ann had a photograph of herself as a baby that looked exactly like a photograph my mother had kept in a box in her closet. A photograph no one else had ever seen for 53 years. The same nose, the same forehead, the same way of holding the chin slightly down. My mother said, I knew the moment she described it. I knew before she even sent it to me. I just knew. We are all still figuring out what this looks like. It is not simple. It is not a movie where everyone hugs and everything resolves in 90 minutes. There are things my mother carried alone for 53 years that don't disappear because a door opened. There is loss in this story alongside the finding. There is complexity and history and 52 years of separate lives that now have to find a way to exist alongside each other. But Ruth Ann is coming to visit in the spring. She is bringing her husband and her boys. My daughter will meet cousins she didn't know she had. My mother will sit across a table from the daughter she named June in a city 3 hours away when she was 19 years old and alone and frightened. And she will see who she became. And Ruth Ann will sit across from the mother she spent 11 years and 1,000 closed doors looking for. And she will know, finally, where she came from. My daughter came home from school that afternoon, and I told her everything. I sat her down at the same kitchen table where she had put the laptop in front of me that morning, and I told her the whole story from the beginning. She listened without interrupting, which, if you have a 16-year-old, you understand is not always a given. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So my homework found Grandma's secret sister." I said, "Yes, that is exactly what happened." She thought about that. She looked at the table. Then she looked up at me and said, "I should probably get extra credit." And I laughed so hard I cried. And this time the crying felt different. It felt like something opening, not closing. Like a window that has been painted shut for 50 years, finally giving way to the weather. Her name was June. She named her June on October 18th, 1974, in a room with fluorescent lighting, and she signed the papers and drove home alone and carried that name inside her for 53 years, without telling a soul. Now she is Ruth Ann, and she is coming home in the spring.